Welcome to Behind the Bar. This is a special episode of Behind the Bar. It's preempting our Diddy coverage of the ongoing trial in New York because there was huge news in another piece of litigation that we've been following very, very closely. That is the Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively lawsuits, countersuits, and so forth. Big development. The Justin Baldoni lawsuit ends with this. So tell us what happened, Jason.
Also taking place in the Southern District of New York, the same courthouse that the Diddy trial is going on in, down in Manhattan. Justin Baldoni lost his legal battle against Blake Lively. Remember, he had sued her. There's a bunch of different legal claims, but the primary claim on which he had sued both her and Ryan Reynolds and the New York Times alleged that they had conspired to defame him by working together to publish that infamous article in the Times where they accused him of where there were stories about him in the Times about all manner of sin, sexual indiscretion, sort of pushing Blake Lively to basically be in uncomfortable ways on
Commenting
set.
on her body, walking in on her while she was breastfeeding, things of that nature.
Not having the proper sort of protections and safeguards on set during the filming to make her feel comfortable, the things that were required in the agreement for her to do the film. Anyway, so he sues her, Ryan Reynolds, and the New York Times for conspiring to defame him in that regard. The judge today dismissed that and dismissed it with prejudice, meaning not free to refile. Oftentimes in civil litigation like this, courts will grant motions to dismiss, but will say to the plaintiff, you can refile if you add additional allegations. If you have different facts to develop, you can refile. Here, the judge said, nope, there is no way that you can cure this complaint. It is dismissed with prejudice. They can still appeal, but they can't refile.
This is a massive development, and it happened at the motion to dismiss stage, which is early.
Very early.
This is early in a case. This is before all of the discovery, all of the depositions that take place. You then have another phase where you have summary judgment motions, but that's with the benefit of taking fact discovery, taking people's depositions. The motion to dismiss stage of a lawsuit is just based on the complaint, saying, do you have enough here for this case to go forward as it's written in the four corners of this complaint? And the judge said, you don't.
This is really important. I'm glad you hit on this point. The judge said that even if we assume that every single thing that Justin Baldoni alleges is true, this is the standard for motion to dismiss, every single thing you've alleged is in fact true.
You still don't have a lawsuit.
I still am dismissing your claim because as a matter of law, you do not have a claim for defamation. That is what the judge said.
So what was the basis of this finding? Because we need to tease apart that there were different lawsuits going on. Justin Baldoni sued the New York Times and said the article that you wrote in conjunction with Blake Lively's team feeding you information was biased towards me. It cherry-picked certain evidence of what went down on the set of It Ends With Us to make me and frame me as the bad guy in all this. And that was part of a coordinated smear campaign by you, Blake Lively, and you, the New York Times, to set me up as the bad guy. What did the judge have to say about that?
So let's start with the first thing that happened. Blake Lively filed a civil rights complaint against Justin Baldoni in which she made these allegations. Now, it's important to know that no matter what somebody puts in a complaint, they can never be sued for defamation for that. You can say whatever you want without exception in a complaint. It can never be grounds for defamation. Now, if you purposely lie in a complaint, there can be other things.
There's other sanctions.
Prosecution, things like that. But we're talking defamation here. You can never, ever be sued for what you allege in a complaint for defamation. So let's get that at the start.
That's called the litigation privilege. In the four corners of that document, whatever you've alleged under penalty. By the way, when you file a complaint, you are swearing and attesting to the truth of those allegations. You can't be sued for defamation just for putting in those allegations. The policy behind it is we want to handle these things in court.
Every time somebody sued somebody else, they would be countersued for defamation in the four corners of the document. So we say, look, we need to allow people access to the courts, so we allow them to sue without fear that they're going to be countersued for defamation. They get those allegations out there. So that's thing one. The allegation that Baldoni made is, again, remember, that they all conspired, Lively, Reynolds, and the New York Times, to then have this New York Times article be written. What the judge found was that the Times article, and therefore the conspiracy, was largely based on the Blake Lively lawsuit. Therefore, because Blake Lively's lawsuit is protected, the New York Times article, which is based upon the Blake Lively allegations, is also protected because just like Blake Lively cannot be sued for anything she says in her litigation, in her lawsuit, the New York Times, as all news organizations enjoy, are privileged. They can write whatever they want if it's based upon the underlying lawsuit.
Yeah,
so it can't be defamatory.
That's right. You'll hear the term called fair reporting privilege. All this means is that an organization like the New York Times, or TMZ for that matter, if we are basing a story within the parameters of a complaint that's been filed, even if it turns out that that complaint is factually deficient in some way, the New York Times can't be held accountable for that because that's how we get news out here in the United States. That's what a free press is. You're allowed to take these filings. You'll see this a lot. You know, Diddy has said all these civil lawsuits against me are filled with lies. I wasn't even in town for some of them. They are riddled with inaccuracies and inconsistencies. That's all well and good, but you'll notice that every news organization, when a civil suit is filed against Diddy, will write a story based on the allegations in the complaint. When we are reporting that these are just allegations in a complaint, we're not saying that they're factually accurate. We're just telling the world that someone has filed a complaint. In the same sense, Blake Lively, you're not putting your imprimatur that these are true things about Justin Baldoni, but you are allowed to report on them, and that's what the
Now, here there's a big wrinkle. Let's talk about this. Baldoni had alleged the New York Times didn't just write based on the four corners of what Blake Lively had said. They said that they were privy to certain text messages and emails between Lively and Baldoni and others, and they said the New York Times cherry-picked, basically chose those allegations they wanted to write about. So it wasn't just, according to Baldoni, it wasn't just the Times writing about the four corners of the Blake Lively lawsuit. They were, in fact, taking these other out-of-court statements that weren't included in the lawsuit, cherry-picking them to create a false narrative about what happened. But the judge also said that doesn't get me there.
Yeah, said that just doesn't fly. The Times actually, the judge actually said the New York Times reviewed the available evidence and reported, perhaps in a dramatized manner, what it believed to have happened. So the court said in reviewing all this information, even though they may have seen text messages that undermined Blake Lively's story or cast it in a different light, maybe put Baldoni in a more favorable position, it said the Times did this, and they did it in a dramatic fashion, but they did it fairly.
Yeah, right. It wasn't that the judge didn't conclude if the judge would have, he wouldn't have dismissed the case. He didn't conclude the New York Times knew the information that Blake Lively was saying was false or had text messages that completely undermined her claims. He basically said, look, I've reviewed everything the New York Times has looked at, and their reporting, although dramatized, and that's important, right? Newspapers can do that. It is consistent with what she had in her complaint, and therefore, I think it was a fair report based on the underlying allegations that she had in her complaint. And again, that's immune from liability for defamation.
He's essentially saying that the Times acted in pretty good faith here. And there's a famous case for public figures like Justin Baldoni, like Blake Lively, that says news media, when they're covering public figures, they can't act with malice or reckless disregard. They can't put their head in the sand about contrary facts, and they can't maliciously try to make Justin Baldoni look bad.
They can't say, we know this is false, but we're gonna say it's true anyways. But as long as they don't get to that standard, they're okay.
Yeah, and so where does this leave everything now? So remember, this is Justin Baldoni's lawsuit has now been dismissed against the Times, Blake Lively, and Ryan Reynolds. Quick point on Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds was accused of having referred to Justin Baldoni as a sexual predator. The court said, yeah, but he believed that to be true based on the complaint his wife filed. So sort of similar reasoning. Once that domino falls, that everything closely tracked her civil rights complaint, all of the other torts go away as well. But in any respect, she now has litigation pending against Justin Baldoni, and he has no countersuit left. Where does this leave the dynamic?
Well, just to be really clear, he still
he can appeal.
The judge did allow him to maintain or to refile on a secondary, tertiary claim called tortious interference with contract. He's saying basically she said these things, and that caused my contract with the studio to be nullified. The judge
and my
said,
agency to drop me, WME.
Yeah. The judge said you can refile that with different facts if they come up. So remember, we talked about with prejudice, without prejudice. The defamation allegations were dismissed with prejudice, cannot refile. The ones about tortious interference with contract without prejudice, so he can refile, but that's small potatoes. The defamation claim, he had alleged damages of $650 million if you take all the parties together. There's very limited damages for tortious interference with contract, much smaller potatoes.
He can appeal this. It's a 132-page opinion, though. It looks very carefully reasoned, and good luck on appeal overturning
Here's
this.
the real problem that he has. The judge invited, in his decision, the judge invited the plaintiffs. I'm sorry, the judge invited, in this case, the counter defendants. That's
The Blake Lively.
Reynolds, and the New York Times, to make their case, to file subsequent documents as to why they believe that Justin Baldoni should be held liable for all of their attorney's fees during the course of this case. That is going to be in the millions, if not tens of millions of dollars. So this could be a bill that if the courts, they're going to file that document, those papers, they want those fees. If the court agrees that they're entitled to their fees, he's going to get an invoice for tens of millions of dollars potentially. So now he's got the right to an appeal, but that money will be tacked on.
That's right.
To what he already might owe them. And what are the chances of he's going to prevail on appeal? Appellate courts are very deferential to findings of the trial court. I don't really see him getting it overturned.
Yeah, and from what we can tell, this is a very lengthy opinion. It looks like the judge took these matters very seriously, wrestled with them, and applied the law as they saw fit. It will, I think, be quite difficult to overturn, but we'll see. You know, Justin Baldoni hired Brian Friedman, who is a hotshot lawyer. Yeah. So maybe he has a plan to refile some of these claims that he's allowed to amend and appeal the other ones. We'll have to see, because right now the settlement dynamics are terrible for him. She has her pending lawsuit still live against him. She is claiming victory. She says she feels vindicated. There are sources close to
grateful, vindicated, and relieved is the statement we got.
I mean, this is a terrible day if you're Justin Baldoni.
He does. Just to hit the point you just made, Blake Lively still has her claims against her sexual
harassment claims and so forth
against Baldoni. Those are still pending. There is a motion to dismiss. He has filed a motion to dismiss. He's got to be praying like crazy that motion to dismiss is granted. If it is, it's sort of maybe level.
Maybe they have a walk away of some sort.
Walk away, yeah, exactly. But what a bad day for Baldoni. I mean, you and I, at least I did. I thought, I don't want to speak for you, I thought that he had a really good case against her. I still am stunned by the absolutism of the judge's ruling here. How sort of, not only am I dismissing it, no opportunity to refile, I'm dismissing it with prejudice. Basically, I am cutting this off at the stem, and you have no chance in this case.
I always thought the case against the New York Times was going to be a difficult one.
That was going to be tough.
That was going to be difficult. We work in news. We know how robust that First Amendment protection is when you're basing a story you're writing on a filed complaint of some sort. So I always knew that would be an uphill battle. I am shocked, though, that the entirety of the smear campaign, given how Brian Friedman has sort of framed this case.
Baldoni's
lawyer. Exactly. He has put up documents. He said, I want the world to see the context here. He has set up websites where he said, here's the entirety of the text messages, some things unflattering to Baldoni. And I thought that was a sort of very strategic way of approaching the case to say, my client's not perfect, but he's not the monster that she has made him out to be. But it's all for naught here.
Here's what came down for me. I thought that she acted really horribly. I mean, I'm not. Maybe he did too. I'm not suggesting that he didn't. But I thought the things she said about him and the things that were included in the New York Times article, putting aside the Times' potential liability, I thought they were not true.
Yes.
I thought they were extraordinary that she would say them both in her complaint. We got the immunity there, but she said things to the media also. She said them to the New York Times. I really am stunned that none of this, according to the judge, reaches a standard for potential liability. Not even like
at a motion to dismiss stage.
At a motion to dismiss stage, right? Things get dismissed all the time later on in the proceedings, but this motion to dismiss, where you're accepting every single thing that he has said in the complaint as true, you're still dismissing the claim.
Let me ask you a question, one more, before we go to some comments. Where does this leave the court of public opinion? Obviously, now this is a huge loss for Justin Baldoni, but does the narrative now shift in Blake's favor because of the legal result, where she was clearly behind for a very long time? She was seen as the mean girl. She was seen as filing false claims against this guy. He was winning in the court of public opinion.
I think it changes everything.
I think it
does
changes too.
Everything. I think that she is now, I mean, look, there are still a lot of people that cannot stand her, that think that he was wronged. And the judge's ruling is not going to change that. But I think generally, I think it was 80-20 or 90-10 in Baldoni's favor in the court of public opinion. Now, I think from what I've seen, I read the comments, I think it's closer to 50-50 now.
Similar to Johnny Depp and Amber Heard.
Yeah,
He
that's
surfaced from that pretty scot-free. So we'll see what this does. Let's go to some questions.
Is it possible that Blake bribed the court? No.
No. In a case this high profile, a judge is not going to be bribed.
It's also
in any
the
case.
Southern District of New York. It just, it doesn't happen. Boo Blake and opinions about Boo Blake and Ryan are evil. Okay. Baldoni can still amend. Don't forget we talked about that. He can't really amend on the defamation claims.
He can appeal on those. He can appeal this ruling entirely and take his chances in another higher court. But in terms of amending his pleadings, he only left an opening for a couple smaller claims.
Yeah. Let's skip down to Fiona Kennedy. She wasn't cleared. The judge blocked her claims of emotional distress before today's dismissal. Defamation is very difficult to prove. We knew this months ago, but he threw out her claim before this. Her claim is not thrown out, just to be clear. What is she cannot claim damages based on emotional distress, but she still very much has the underlying sexual harassment claims against him. I tend to agree with you. I don't think they're very strong claims, but nevertheless, they still exist.
And remember, she is having to drop those because she was unwilling to turn over her medical records. It's not as if they were just dropped. She was agreeing to walk away from them to avoid handing over certain medical records. Now, I don't know. Maybe she's emboldened to say, no, I'd like those claims. Here are my medical records. I'm winning now in court. Let me keep the pressure on him.
Tony, can you scroll up for one last comment that I saw just before this one? Yeah, perfect. I just want to end on this. Lori Senator, wow, the only winners are the attorneys.
As it always is.
That's the system, the way it works. Derek and I, as attorneys, once again, don't feel that bad about that.
Can't say I disagree.
All right, guys. See you tomorrow with more Diddy stuff. Bye.